Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Lyon, and today I will be sharing with you the history of the League of Nations, a final project meeting requirements for Mr. O'Connell's U.S. National Government course for NICC. The League of Nations began in 1918 after World War I. No, not that type of league. Rather, the League of Nations was formed as a way to solve disputes between countries before warfare started, according to William Dudley. The Treaty of Versailles was the formal peace treaty that ended World War I with stipulations for the creation of the League of Nations. President Wilson held to the idealistic economic theories that led to his proposal for just peace. He believed a just peace could be created by developing an international system where individual nations could put aside their narrow self-interest and power politics to work for world peace and cooperation. President Wilson attended the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, promoting his ideals and spending an entire year working out the details of what would eventually come to be known as the Treaty of Versailles. Upon his return home, the fight to convince Congress and U.S. citizens to join would begin. Republicans held the White House, beginning with President Woodrow Wilson, throughout the 1920s. This Republican government supported a laissez-faire policy of minimal government interference in business practices. These Republican beliefs, along with the ideas of isolationism, allowing the U.S. to become self-reliant, and protectionism, which involved taxing imports, helped lead to the economic boom of the 1920s, in which radio, movies, and print media were the primary sources of news. The opposition that President Wilson faced upon his return from the Paris Peace Conference was fierce, according to J. Michael Hogan. The opposition came from two groups, the Irreconcilables, which consisted of about 12 to 18 U.S. senators who opposed the ratification of the Treaty of Versailles, and the Reservationists, who were willing to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, but with certain amendments as shared by Ann Byers. His fiercest opponent was Massachusetts Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, who was the leader of the Reservationists and believed that the Treaty of Versailles would diminish congressional power and force the United States to undertake heavy obligations. Newspaper political cartoons and reporting on both sides of the issue on whether the United States should join with the League of Nations or remain separate took center stage with speeches for and against, newspaper articles and radio spots, and of course political cartoons. President Wilson took his campaign to sell the Treaty of Versailles to the American people, setting out on a 27-day train tour, making stops in the Midwest and West Coast, and traveling 8,000 miles. Unfortunately, his health dictated he returned home to Washington after only 22 days, exhausted and ill. Upon his return to the White House from his whistle-stopping campaign, he suffered a stroke. In spite of his best efforts and the speeches he made, the president fell victim to his own ideas of grandeur and confidence in his ability to persuade the American people to support the treaty, according to J. Michael Hogan. On November 19, 1919, the Senate voted down the Treaty of Versailles, and therefore the United States did not take part in the League of Nations. Had the United States joined the League of Nations, would World War II still have occurred? The political power of the United States was great at the time. The primary function of the League of Nations was to have countries work together to solve issues and come to peaceful agreements before resorting to war. What if President Wilson's whistle-stopping campaign had succeeded? Unfortunately, World War II did happen, and the League of Nations ultimately failed. But what it did succeed in was bringing about the creation of the United Nations, which is still in effect today, with the goal of advancing peace and progress for a better world.